War has a strange way of creating legends. Some are born from impossible victories, others from acts of extraordinary courage. And then there are the stories that soldiers swear are true because they lived through them, even if they still struggle to explain how they survived. During the final year of World War II, American armored divisions fighting across Europe often joked that every Sherman tank had two lives. The first ended the day it entered combat. The second depended entirely on luck. The joke existed for a reason. The M4 Sherman was never the most heavily armored tank on the battlefield. German heavy tanks like the Tiger I and Panther tank possessed thicker armor and more powerful guns capable of destroying a Sherman from well over 1,000 yards away under favorable conditions. American tank crews knew this. They discussed it openly. Every replacement crew heard the same warnings before entering combat. Never fight a Panther head-on. Never underestimate an anti-tank gun. Keep moving. Stay with the infantry. Trust your crew. Because inside a Sherman, survival depended less on armor and more on teamwork. Among the thousands of Shermans rolling across Europe during 1944 was one that eventually earned an unusual reputation among neighboring units. Its crew called it Lucky Lady. The name had originally been painted on the side as a joke. No one imagined how appropriate it would eventually become. The 5 men inside had trained together for nearly a year before ever seeing combat. Like most American tank crews, they quickly discovered that operating a tank required absolute trust. Each member performed a role no one else could fully replace. The commander watched the battlefield, searching constantly for threats while directing the crew. The gunner aimed and fired the 75mm cannon with deadly precision. The loader worked almost continuously during battle, lifting heavy shells into the breach as quickly as possible. The driver maneuvered 30 tons of steel through mud, forests, villages, and narrow roads while avoiding mines and enemy fire. Beside him, the assistant driver operated the bow machine gun, watched for infantry, and helped maintain radio communication. Inside the tank, space was unbelievably cramped. The 5 men spent countless hours shoulder to shoulder. They ate together, argued together, laughed together, and eventually, they would fight together. Training in England proved exhausting. American instructors repeatedly emphasized one lesson above all others. A tank crew that hesitated usually died. Everything had to become instinct. Loading shells, changing ammunition types, repairing damaged tracks, escaping a burning vehicle. Every drill repeated endlessly. At first, many recruits considered the repetition excessive. Months later, they understood. When shells began flying, nobody had time to think. They simply reacted. On June 6, 1944, Allied forces launched the Normandy landings. The largest amphibious invasion in history had begun. Lucky Lady did not land on the beaches during the opening hours. Instead, the crew crossed into France after engineers secured enough territory for armored units to move inland. Even then, progress remained painfully slow. Normandy's famous hedgerows created a nightmare for tank crews. Centuries-old earthen embankments divided fields into hundreds of natural fortresses. Tall hedges blocked visibility. Narrow lanes restricted movement. Every turn concealed potential danger. German anti-tank teams used the terrain masterfully. A Sherman might advance through one quiet field, only to encounter a hidden gun 50 yards away in the next. Entire tank columns sometimes disappeared within minutes. The Lucky Lady's crew experienced their first combat only days after arriving. Moving cautiously through a narrow country road bordered by thick hedgerows, they suddenly heard their commander shout over the intercom, "Gun left," before anyone could fully react. A deafening explosion slammed into the front of the tank. The entire vehicle lurched sideways. Steel rang throughout the fighting compartment. Dust filled the air. For one terrifying second, nobody spoke. The driver instinctively stopped. The commander immediately screamed another order. "Move! Move!" The engine roared. Lucky Lady accelerated forward, just as another German shell struck the road behind them. Only after reaching cover did the crew inspect the damage. The armor bore a deep scar where the projectile had struck. The shell had failed to penetrate. Instead, it ricocheted away. The crew stared silently at the damaged steel. 1 inch higher, the result might have been completely different. That evening, maintenance crews examined the impact. The armor remained intact. The Sherman returned to action the following morning. Its first direct hit. Its first escape. No one imagined there would eventually be dozens more. As Allied forces slowly broke through Normandy, armored battles became increasingly frequent. The Germans fought desperately to contain the Allied advance. Every village seemed defended. Every crossroads covered. Anti-tank guns waited behind stone walls. Panzer crews established ambushes inside forests. Mines covered likely routes of advance. Tank warfare quickly became a contest of observation. The crew who spotted the enemy first often survived. The crew who hesitated often did not. Lucky Lady's commander developed a simple habit. He never allowed the tank to remain stationary longer than absolutely necessary. After every shot, move. After every burst of machine gun fire, move. After every crossroads, move. German gunners frequently fired at the last known position of a target. Movement complicated their calculations. It also saved lives. The Sherman itself possessed advantages often overlooked by history. Its engine proved remarkably reliable. Repairs could often be completed in the field. Its turret rotated quickly. Its radios generally worked better than many German counterparts, allowing American tank units to coordinate more effectively. Perhaps most importantly, American industry produced Shermans in enormous numbers. Replacement parts reached the front rapidly. Crews rarely fought alone. Maintenance teams worked tirelessly behind the lines to keep damaged vehicles operational. After several weeks of combat, Lucky Lady had accumulated more scars. Machine gun impacts, mortar fragments, shrapnel from artillery, near misses. Every mark told another story. The crew began joking that the tank looked older than the war itself. Then came their first encounter with one of Germany's most feared weapons. Near the French town of Saint-Lô, intelligence reported German armored forces preparing a counterattack. Among them, several Panthers. Unlike earlier anti-tank guns, Panthers represented a deadly challenge. Their high-velocity 75mm gun could destroy a Sherman at ranges where American crews struggled to respond effectively. When the battle began, both sides maneuvered through narrow country roads lined with hedgerows. Visibility remained terrible. Every intersection threatened disaster. Suddenly, the commander spotted movement ahead. A Panther emerged from behind a ruined farmhouse. Almost simultaneously, both tanks fired. The German shell struck Lucky Lady's turret with incredible force. The explosion echoed across the countryside. Inside the Sherman, every crew member believed they had been hit fatally. The impact jammed equipment. Fragments of paint and metal flew through the compartment. Radio headphones fell from their hooks. The commander temporarily lost hearing in one ear. Smoke filled the interior. Yet somehow, the shell had struck at an angle. Instead of penetrating, it glanced off the curved turret armor. The Sherman survived. The gunner recovered first. Before the Panther crew could fire again, he placed an armor-piercing round into the German tank's side as another American Sherman joined the engagement. Within seconds, the Panther burned. Afterward, the maintenance crews carefully counted the damage. Lucky Lady had survived multiple direct impacts already. Some from anti-tank guns, some from artillery, one from a Panther itself. The tank was beginning to earn its nickname. Other crews started recognizing it by sight. There goes Lucky Lady. They're still running. Those guys must have 9 lives. Nobody realized the incredible journey had barely begun. The battles across France were only the beginning. Ahead lay Belgium, the German border, the Battle of the Bulge, and dozens more impacts that should have destroyed both the tank and every man inside it. By August 1944, the Allied breakout from Normandy had finally begun. After weeks of brutal fighting through the hedgerows, American armored divisions poured into the open countryside of France. For the first time since the invasion, tank crews could maneuver the way they had trained back in England. Fast. His Boxer Eliza Strato. Aggressively, with room to outflank the enemy. The pace of the war changed almost overnight. Entire German formations found themselves retreating eastward as Allied columns advanced town after town, village after village. For the crew of Lucky Lady, the campaign became a race across France. Some days they traveled more than 50 miles. Other days they barely moved a single mile after encountering mines, demolished bridges, or determined German resistance. Every morning followed the same routine. Wake before sunrise. Inspect the tank. Check the engine. Inspect the tracks. Clean the main gun. Count ammunition. Inspect every scar left by yesterday's battle. The Sherman was beginning to resemble something held together by determination more than factory steel. The hull carried dozens of dents from artillery fragments. Machine gun rounds had chipped away sections of paint. Small repairs covered nearly every surface. Replacement road wheels no longer matched one another. Even the turret bore visible welding marks where field mechanics had reinforced damaged sections. Yet mechanically, Lucky Lady remained remarkably reliable. Its crew trusted it completely. The maintenance teams joked that the Sherman refused to die simply because it enjoyed proving everyone wrong. The tank's reputation slowly spread beyond its own company. Whenever another crew noticed the familiar collection of dents crossing its armor, someone usually smiled. Still alive. Still fighting. Eventually another nickname appeared. The tank that won't quit. No one kept an exact count at first. The crew certainly didn't. During combat, survival mattered far more than statistics. But after nearly every engagement, maintenance officers carefully recorded damage reports. One impact. Another ricochet. More fragment scars. Near misses. The number steadily climbed. 10. Then 15. Then 20. Each represented another day the crew had somehow escaped death. Not every impact came from tanks. In fact, most did not. German anti-tank guns remained one of the greatest threats. Hidden inside barns, camouflaged beneath trees, concealed among ruined buildings. These weapons often fired only once before relocating. The first warning usually arrived as a sudden flash. Then the unmistakable metallic crash of armor being struck. One afternoon outside the French city of Reims, Lucky Lady advanced beside several infantry platoons when disaster nearly struck. The lead Sherman suddenly exploded after triggering a concealed anti-tank gun. Smoke engulfed the narrow road. Confusion spread instantly. No one knew exactly where the German position was located. The second Sherman halted. Seconds later, another shell punched straight through its engine compartment. The vehicle burst into flames. Now Lucky Lady stood next. The commander scanned desperately through his binoculars. Nothing. No movement. No visible gun. Only ruined stone buildings lining both sides of the road. Then, a tiny flicker appeared inside an upstairs window. There! The gunner rotated the turret almost instantly. The 75mm cannon fired. The building disappeared beneath dust and shattered stone. Before anyone celebrated, another impact slammed against Lucky Lady's front hull. The crew instinctively ducked. Again, the shell failed to penetrate. Instead, it gouged another enormous scar across the armor. The hidden gun had fired one final shot before being destroyed. That evening, the mechanics quietly added another chalk mark inside the maintenance tent. Impact number 21. The crew barely noticed anymore. Survival had become routine. As autumn approached, Allied forces crossed into Belgium. The mood changed dramatically. Unlike the devastated villages of Normandy, many Belgian towns welcomed American troops as liberators. Children waved flags. Families offered food. Crowds lined the streets cheering the endless columns of tanks. For a brief moment, the war almost seemed distant. Then the Germans reminded everyone it wasn't over. Near the German frontier, resistance stiffened once again. Fresh panzer units entered the fighting. Veteran crews who had escaped Normandy now defended their homeland with renewed determination. The Sherman's greatest enemy once again appeared. The Panther tank. Fast, well-armored, armed with one of the finest tank guns of the war. American tank crews respected it deeply. They also feared it. The first Panther Lucky Lady encountered had nearly destroyed them. The second came during a rainy afternoon near the Belgian border. Visibility dropped to only a few hundred yards. Mud covered everything. Both tanks spotted each other almost simultaneously. The Panther fired first. Its shell struck the Sherman's suspension with tremendous force. The explosion tore away one road wheel and damaged part of the track. Lucky Lady spun violently before stopping. Inside, everyone expected another shot. The driver shouted that they couldn't move. The commander knew remaining stationary meant death. Without hesitation, the loader and assistant driver climbed outside under enemy fire. Working frantically, they replaced damaged track sections while bullets snapped overhead. The gunner continued firing high explosive rounds toward the Panther, not because they could destroy it from that angle, but to force its commander to remain buttoned up inside the turret. Those precious seconds made all the difference. Nearby American tank destroyers finally reached firing position. Moments later, the Panther erupted into flames. The Sherman survived once again, not because its armor proved stronger, but because every crew member performed his role perfectly under unimaginable pressure. That lesson repeated itself throughout the campaign. Victory inside a tank rarely belonged to one man. It belonged to 5. Winter arrived. With it came Germany's last great offensive. The Battle of the Bulge. In December 1944, thousands of German soldiers, tanks, and artillery pieces smashed into Allied lines through the Ardennes forest. Snow covered the landscape. Roads became sheets of ice. Fog grounded Allied aircraft. Suddenly, American tank crews found themselves fighting under some of the worst conditions imaginable. Lucky Lady entered the Ardennes already carrying more battle scars than most tanks accumulated during an entire war. The crew joked that German shells seemed attracted to them. One snowy morning, while supporting infantry near Bastogne, artillery began falling across the surrounding forest. The bombardment lasted nearly an hour. Tree trunks exploded into deadly splinters. Fragments rained onto the Sherman's armor. Several direct fragment strikes dented the turret. One larger shell burst only yards away, shaking the entire vehicle so violently that the radio briefly stopped working. When the barrage finally ended, maintenance crews counted more than a dozen new fragment impacts. None penetrated, but each left another permanent mark. The total climbed higher. 27, 31, 34. Every scar represented another narrow escape. The psychological strain became almost unbearable. Unlike new crews entering combat, Lucky Lady's crew understood exactly what every impact sounded like. They recognized the difference between armor-piercing rounds and artillery fragments, between ricochets and penetrating hits. Every metallic crash instantly triggered the same terrifying thought. Is this the one? At night, they rarely spoke about it. Instead, they quietly cleaned weapons, inspected equipment, and prepared for tomorrow. Fear never disappeared. They simply learned to function alongside it. The tank itself almost became another member of the crew. They knew every unusual engine noise, every vibration, every dent. The commander often patted the turret before climbing inside. "Take care of us today." Nobody laughed anymore. Superstition became common among veteran crews. Some carried lucky coins. Others wore the same gloves every battle. Lucky Lady herself became the greatest superstition of all. New replacement crews sometimes requested fighting beside her. "If she's there, maybe we'll make it too." By early 1945, field maintenance records revealed something astonishing. The Sherman had accumulated nearly 40 recorded direct impacts from anti-tank fire, artillery, mortar fragments, collapsing buildings, mines, and countless smaller projectiles. Few tanks remained in frontline service long enough to reach such a number. Fewer still with their original crew. Yet the hardest battles still lay ahead. Germany itself awaited. Every remaining German soldier knew the war was nearly lost, which made them, in many cases, more dangerous than ever. For Lucky Lady and her 5 exhausted crewmen, the final campaign would test whether fortune had finally run out. By March 1945, the war in Europe was entering its final chapter. American armored divisions had crossed the Rhine, the last great natural barrier protecting the heart of Germany. The once powerful German army was collapsing under constant pressure from both east and west. Cities lay in ruins. Fuel was scarce. Replacement crews were poorly trained. Many experienced officers had already been killed. Yet surrender was the last thing on many German soldiers' minds. If anything, the fighting became even more desperate. For the crew of Lucky Lady, the final campaign felt strangely different from everything that had come before. The victories came faster. The roads grew emptier. Entire German units surrendered without firing a shot. Columns of exhausted prisoners marched westward, relieved simply to be alive. But every veteran tanker knew one dangerous truth. A retreating army could still be deadly, especially one defending its homeland. Some of the fiercest resistance now came not from regular panzer divisions, but from isolated anti-tank crews determined to delay the Allied advance for just a few more hours. Every ruined village remained a potential ambush. Every crossroads demanded caution. Every forest concealed uncertainty. Lucky Lady had now survived months of continuous combat. Its original olive drab paint was barely visible beneath layers of scratches, weld repairs, replacement armor plates, and soot. The front glacis looked as though a giant hammer had struck it dozens of times. Deep grooves crossed the turret where shells had ricocheted away. Several storage boxes had been replaced after artillery fragments shredded the originals. The suspension creaked loudly over rough ground. One headlight had been missing since France. Nobody bothered replacing it. The crew no longer saw damage. They saw memories. This dent. That's Normandy. The crack near the driver's hatch. Belgium. The turret scar. That panther outside Bastogne. Every mark carried a story. Every repair represented another day they had somehow survived. The mechanics stopped trying to make Lucky Lady look new. Instead, they focused on keeping her moving. That mattered far more. The crew had changed too. Months of combat had aged them beyond their years. The newest replacement soldiers arriving from America often looked impossibly young. Clean uniforms, fresh faces, nervous smiles. Lucky Lady's crew remembered being exactly the same. Now, gray dust permanently covered their uniforms. Dark circles surrounded tired eyes. Their conversations had become quieter, more practical. Nobody spoke much before battle. There was nothing left to say. They already knew what awaited them. During one advance through western Germany, intelligence reported that several German anti-tank guns covered a narrow valley leading toward an important bridge. Infantry scouts confirmed the threat. Destroying those guns became essential. The attack began shortly after sunrise. American artillery softened suspected positions. Smoke drifted across the valley. Shermans advanced carefully in staggered formation. Lucky Lady occupied the center of the column. For several minutes, Nothing happened. Then the valley erupted. A hidden 88mm anti-tank gun opened fire from a concealed position among shattered buildings. The first Sherman in the column exploded almost instantly. Before anyone could react, a second gun joined the fight. Armor-piercing rounds screamed across the valley. The American formation scattered. Lucky Lady accelerated toward a stone wall as another shell slammed against its side armor. The impact nearly threw the driver from his seat. Inside the fighting compartment, dust filled the air once again. The commander looked toward the gunner. Status? I'm still here. Loader? Still here. Driver? Tank still moves. Good enough. The battle continued. The gunner quickly identified the first anti-tank position. One high-explosive shell. Then another. The ruined building disappeared beneath collapsing masonry. Moments later, the second gun revealed itself by firing again. Its shell struck Lucky Lady's turret ring. The force jammed the turret briefly. For several terrifying seconds, the crew couldn't rotate their main gun. The assistant driver immediately climbed partly outside despite incoming fire. Working with astonishing speed, he cleared twisted metal that had jammed the mechanism. The turret moved again. The gunner fired almost instantly. Silence followed. The valley belonged to the Americans. After the battle, mechanics inspected Lucky Lady carefully. The Sherman had survived yet another direct hit that easily could have destroyed it. Another chalk mark joined the growing list. 39. The crew laughed quietly. So close to 40. The joke felt absurd. Who counted shell impacts? Apparently, they did. Only a week later, they received their answer. Near the city of Leipzig, scattered German defenders launched one final counterattack using everything they still possessed: infantry, anti-tank rockets, artillery, several remaining armored vehicles. The fighting lasted nearly the entire afternoon. During one particularly violent exchange, Lucky Lady supported infantry advancing through a partially destroyed industrial district. Visibility barely reached 50 yards because of smoke and collapsing buildings. Without warning, a German anti-tank rocket streaked from the upper floor of a factory. The projectile struck the Sherman's front hull. The explosion echoed through the streets. The entire crew instinctively braced for catastrophe. Instead, silence. Harnerbeer. The armor held. The shaped charge jet damaged external equipment and scarred the front plate, but it failed to penetrate into the crew compartment. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then the commander slowly smiled. 40. Nobody cheered. Nobody celebrated. The number itself suddenly seemed meaningless. 40 direct hits. 40 reminders that statistics could never fully explain survival. Some crews never survived their first engagement. Others fought dozens of battles without serious damage. War rarely rewarded courage fairly. Luck played a role no training manual could ever teach. The final weeks passed quickly. American forces advanced deeper into Germany almost daily. Entire highways filled with abandoned German vehicles. Civilians emerged cautiously from basements. White flags appeared in village windows. The end was clearly approaching. Then, on May 8, 1945, Germany officially surrendered. The war in Europe was over. For the first time in nearly a year, Lucky Lady's crew climbed out of their Sherman without wondering whether they would climb back inside tomorrow. The silence felt almost unfamiliar. No artillery, no engines, no distant explosions. Just peace. A few days later, maintenance officers completed one final inspection of the battered Sherman. The report amazed everyone who read it. The tank had accumulated approximately 40 documented direct impacts from armor-piercing shells, anti-tank guns, rockets, artillery fragments, mortar blasts, collapsing structures, mines, and countless smaller projectiles. Few armored vehicles remained operational long enough to endure such punishment. Even fewer retained nearly the same crew from beginning to end. Eventually, the 5 men returned home. Like millions of veterans, they rarely spoke in detail about the war. When people asked how they survived, they usually shrugged. We were lucky. But the truth was far more complicated. Luck certainly mattered. A shell striking 2 inches higher, a delayed repair, a hidden mine. Any one of those moments could have changed everything. Yet luck alone could never explain months of survival. Their commander made sound tactical decisions. The driver constantly kept the tank moving. The gunner reacted with remarkable speed under pressure. The loader never stopped working, even during the most violent engagements. The assistant driver repeatedly risked his own life making emergency repairs while under fire. Behind them stood mechanics who somehow kept an aging Sherman operational despite relentless combat. Behind those mechanics stood an industrial system capable of supplying spare parts across an entire continent. And behind all of them stood thousands of infantrymen, engineers, artillery crews, and fellow tankers whose support often meant the difference between survival and destruction. Historians still debate the strengths and weaknesses of the M4 Sherman. Some criticize its thinner armor compared to German heavy tanks. Others praise its reliability, mobility, mechanical simplicity, and the overwhelming logistical support that kept it fighting from Normandy to Berlin. The truth is that no tank ever fought alone. Victory depended on doctrine, communication, maintenance, training, air superiority, teamwork. The Sherman became successful not because it was invincible, but because it was part of a system that allowed crews to fight, recover, repair, and fight again. Lucky Lady embodied that reality. Its 40 scars were not proof of indestructibility. They were proof of resilience. Proof that survival in war is rarely determined by steel alone. Sometimes, it is determined by 5 exhausted soldiers who refuse to abandon one another. Sometimes, by mechanics who work through the night. Sometimes, by a commander who chooses the right road instead of the wrong one. And sometimes, by a battered old tank that everyone expected to lose. But that simply refused to stop moving until the war itself finally came to an end.